Hey guys, I hope you are well. Welcome to this week's live stream on the George Gammon channel. I do these maybe once or two times a day on the Rebel Capitalist channel. If you guys haven't checked that out, make sure you do so. And I just want to remind everyone to go to rebelcapitalistlive.com. Check it out. Check out the speakers that we're going to have in Houston, January 7th through the 9th, including everyone's favorite Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, Chris Cole, Lynn Alden, Luke Groman, among many others. The Uneducated Economist, my good buddy, going to be there. Lynette Zhang, Mark Moss, the whole crew. So check that out at rebelcapitalistlive.com. All right, let me fire into your questions. Last week I kind of went off on a rant, but I think it was well worthwhile. So tonight I want to focus directly on questions. All right, what do we got here? What is the likelihood of the U.S. government banning private investors from owning rental real estate? They could make it difficult. Boy, I don't really see that as too likely, just because they have to prop up the asset prices. The whole entire economy is built on asset prices, more specifically real estate, bonds, and equities. And if you take away investor demand for real estate, that's going to be a big hit to demand, and therefore prices going down potentially. So I don't see that as likely. I think that the way if your point is this whole Great Reset agenda, I did a video on that last week. That was last week's whiteboard video. I'd suggest watching that. And I kind of go over some scenarios. I think it's more likely that the government, the Fed, the central planners, they buy the housing stock periodically from the private sector if we have a big crash like we did in 2008, or if we have unrealized capital gains, or if we have mandatory, let's call it quote unquote upgrading of houses for to be more green, so they're more environmentally friendly, and that costs a lot of money. And so if we do that, I think there could be a push to buy people's properties, just so they could rent it back at a lower mortgage rate, but then the government could come in and do all these things to conserve energy and whatnot. It's just under the guise of either unrealized cap gains or climate change. I think there's no certainties. That's not really a prediction. I just think that out of all the things that I see right now, and who knows what on earth we could see in a year or two or three, but that would be the most. Those would be the most likely in my mind. Let's see how you look at the transition inflation. Has it changed you for the better, or is it still going to be ludicrously out of control? So I think that your outlook for inflation needs to be predicated upon who is creating the dollars that are on the balance sheet of non-bank entities in the real economy, and at what rate they're creating them. So I'm very careful to try my best not to use the phrase money printing, because it's so generic. It really doesn't, it's almost like the word dude now. It's like, what does it mean? I don't know, just whatever, it depends on the context or the phrasing or your tonality in which you say it. And I do think that it's possible to have the amount of dollars in the entire system decrease while you still have a higher rate or a higher number of dollars that are circulating and potentially chasing goods and services. So what I mean by that is you've got the dollars that are on the bank's balance sheet, and that could be, but I think mostly it's in the form of bank reserves, but it could be in the form of the ledger system between the interbank ledger system, the ghost ledger, whatever you want to call it. Most people, it's easiest for them to think about it as Wells Fargo having an account with B of A and B of A having an account with Wells Fargo. Those dollars would be liabilities of the commercial banking system, where the bank reserves that we talk about on this channel all the time are liabilities of the Federal Reserve. So I do think that those dollars could decrease, while at the same time, the dollars that were on the balance sheets of the non-bank entities, that would be the businesses, the small, mid-sized businesses, that would be you, me, the average Joe and Jane, the people. While those dollars could increase, and those dollars would be, again, liabilities of the commercial banking system. So, just as an example, the Fed's balance sheet increases. Okay, they're monetizing the debt. That means that Janet Yellen is sending out checks. Those are becoming, when they're deposited, they're becoming liabilities to the commercial banking system. And those, again, are dollars that are assets on the balance sheet of the non-bank entities, while at the same time, the dollars that are on the balance sheet of the commercial banking system minus bank reserves could go down to the extent where on net balance, there's a decrease. Who knows, because that's all in the shadows and we don't know those numbers. But you could see increased consumer price inflation. And then we always have to look at the supply side of the equation, because I think although it would be very difficult for this to occur long term, you could have a situation, especially short term, where you get supply shocks, where even if dollars are decreasing in the system, on net balance, you have the amount of supply decreasing at a faster rate, and therefore prices going up. So that's a long way to just say, I think you have to look at inflation in the future as, what system do we have? And do we have a system that's being implemented to create on net balance more dollars on the balance sheets of non-bank entities? Because at the end of the day, those are the dollars that would circulate with velocity, or it could potentially circulate with velocity, chasing goods and services. The dollars that are on the bank's balance sheet, even if they're liabilities of other banks, they're not. I don't, unless I'm missing something, which could be. I don't really think those are dollars that are out there circulating, buying hamburgers at McDonald's, or groceries at Safeway, or renting cars, or you know what I'm saying? It's not like JP Morgan is out there competing with you to buy blueberries at Whole Foods. And really that's what it boils down to. So if the system were to stay the same as it has been, where the commercial banks are responsible for the majority of those dollars, I think we get at least asset price deflation. And I would say that we wouldn't get much consumer price inflation unless we have the supply side take a big hit, which is very possible. If we go to and then with this hybrid system that we're in right now, that just depends on how much the government is spending. I mean, how many trillions of dollars are we going to spend this year that basically the Fed is monetizing? Because I think that would really, that's kind of correlated, not kind of, that would be correlated most likely to M2, and therefore the dollars that were on the balance sheet of the non-bank entities. And then if we move into now if they spend $10 trillion and then $20 trillion, and it just keeps going up and up and up and up, then I think inflation would not be transitory, but that's just, we can't know that definitively. We don't know what the future looks like. And then if we go to a central bank digital currency, then I think all bets are off. Then I think you get sustained inflation for long periods of time. Yeah, it feels like the noose is tightening around our necks. Talks of call them the passports, to be YouTube friendly here, for flights. Biden plan to tax unrealized capital gains. Is this the dark winter? I hope not, but I think everyone needs to think through those probabilities and have a plan for what they would do if we do start to see things go that direction even more. I mean, we're seeing them go that direction at breakneck speeds. I honestly, guys, that's all I've been thinking about the last week. I've just been trying to connect these dots, and none of it makes sense. I've been trying to figure out what the push with the vaccines, the hospital capacity, I mean, every single talking point out there, I've been trying to understand to the best of my ability, objectively, looking at both sides of the argument. And the conclusion that I keep coming to is that nobody really knows definitively what is happening here, but yet the media and the politicians are speaking as though it is definitive, but it is absolutely not. And that makes you scratch your head and say, okay, why? I mean, there's a lot of drugs out there that could be very effective against the cerveza sickness, that have worked really, really well in other countries, and they've just completely dismissed, and they won't even allow you to talk about them. And this was even before we had a COVID vaccine. So you got to scratch your head and say, well, why is that? Well, why? It doesn't make much sense. And why is all of this censorship? What's and the conclusion that you come to is that this isn't about health. This is about something else. Obviously, we have a big health issue out there. I'm not saying that the cerveza sickness isn't real, and I'm not even saying it's the flu. It's you don't want to get the cerveza sickness. That's you definitely don't want to get it. If you had the choice, you don't want it. So I think the case fatality rate is very similar in most age groups, but again, it's something you don't want, But I think the lack of ability to have dissenting views on this is very, very, very similar to what you saw in Russia under Joseph Stalin. And I'm not saying that we're going that's the end game that we're going to be there, but I'm saying that it's very similar, and there's no denying that. It just I would encourage all of you, and even if you're not into reading studies and the scientific stuff, and it gets a little dry and a little mundane, but if you just go to Netflix, there's a series. It's like How to Be a Tyrant or something like that. I'm sure most of you, I know they've advertised it quite a bit, and it's very popular. I'm sure most of you guys know what I'm talking about or have heard of it, or How to Be a Dictator or How to Be a Tyrant or something like that. And one of the episodes is on Joseph Stalin. I cannot encourage you, or I cannot recommend that enough. I would strongly encourage you, when this live stream is over, if you've got Netflix, and it's only like a half-hour show, just watch it, and see what Joseph Stalin did, and then just compare that to what you're seeing today in the United States. and you don't have to be a tinfoil hatter or a conspiracy theorist to see the similarities. Anyone in their right mind would see the similarities to what is going on today with the mainstream media and the approved narrative. So that's what makes me very suspicious. And like I said on Twitter today, no one wants me to be wrong more than me. But I think that we're at a crossroads right now. Like I said last week, that these mandates are people really need to understand history before they are pro government mandates. And you know, I want to be clear there. I'm not anti vaccine or anything like that. I think it's your own decision. I mean, you need to understand the risks, the rewards, and you need to make a decision for you or your family that makes sense, right? But those people are just blindly saying, "Oh yes, the government should come in and force everyone to, inject a foreign substance into their body that has really only been tested." Yes, we have a huge sample size, but the long-term side effects are completely unknown. That's when you are on a very, very slippery slope. Especially when you combine that with what they're talking about at the World Economic Forum. And I haven't even talked about this in any of my videos, but another thing that I would strongly suggest you guys researching is the Internet of Bodies. And so we have the Internet of Things. You guys know what that's about. That's where all the things are connected and kind of talk to each other, and everything goes into the cloud. All the data from your refrigerator, from your microwave, I don't know what the hell else is, your car, everything is connected. Well, what they're talking about is the Internet of Bodies. So you would have a chip in your skin or a wearable, and all of that data, all of your vital signs would go into the cloud in real time, and that would be crunched by artificial intelligence. They say it would improve health. Okay. At what cost? Right. And I want, I'm very, very hard on the World Economic Forum and Klaus and Bigglesworth, and you guys know that. So I all the reading that I did on the Internet of Bodies today was frightening, to say the least. But I at least want to give them a hat tip. And the few articles that I did read today on the World Economic Forum's website, they did have a substantial portion of the article that was dedicated to the risks of the Internet of Bodies. They didn't just come out and say, "Hey, I think this is great, let's do it." They came out and said, "Hey, this is revolutionary. This is the way the world's going. I think this is great, but this poses some serious ethical dilemmas here." And so, I'll give them credit where credit is due. I want to be objective. And at least they are mentioning that there are serious moral and ethical issues with everyone's, having a computer chip under their skin, and all of your vital signs, thoughts, dreams, ideas, etc., going into the cloud and being crunched by artificial intelligence, and that artificial intelligence making decisions for you that will, quote unquote, make you and society more healthy. Again, that is a slippery slope right there. And I think, everyone talks about the Great Reset and you'll own nothing and you'll be happy and all these things. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and think that through. But I also think that people should really, really be paying attention to this Internet of Bodies things, because to me, that's even scarier than the "you'll own nothing and like it," or "you'll own nothing and be happy." I mean, they're talking about some crazy, crazy, crazy stuff over there. That is for sure. Whether their intentions are good and they're just completely, I don't want to say misinformed. I don't know that that's the right word, but whether they're just naive to how destructive their policies are, but their intentions are good, or they have malicious intentions, I don't know. I really don't know. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, But on the other hand, I also, after years of being an entrepreneur and having thousands of employees and just dealing with people, subcontractors, and everyone on a daily basis, I think I've gotten a pretty good spidey sense for being able to read people. And when you watch the people from the World Economic Forum do their speeches, boy, it doesn't, they don't scream trustworthiness to me. Anyone that sits there and does some pre-canned speech where they're trying to make it seem like they're not reading off of a teleprompter, but they obviously are, because you can see their eyes going like this while they're trying to have emotion and while they're trying to, vary the tone in their voice, not to sound robotic, and but they're just going like this. You're like, listen, I don't trust that person. At least I don't. I mean, you look at Trudeau's speech that he gave when he talked about the Great Reset, and he talked about how we need to, this whole Build Back Better thing. It's just using, like Klaus says, they need to use COVID as a opportunity for a great reset. Whenever you see, if you see that Trudeau speech, I mean, it's same thing. His eyes are going like this, like he's just reading it off a script, which he is. It's obvious. And so then you say, who's writing that? But so I'm going off on a tangent here, but the bottom line is our freedoms are under attack, and we are on a very, very slippery slope. And I don't know what is going on with the obsessive push for these mandates, but something is off. Something isn't right. And again, the conclusion that I come to over and over and over again is I don't know what's going on, but I know that this is not there's something here that's not about health. I think that's the best way to say it. It seems like Israel is spearheading the Great Reset. Do you hear that, primary? Let's see. Israel wants to microchip school children so they social distance. Yeah, this is what they talked about on the World Economic Forum's website is having like a microchip or some sort of wearable that would alert the medical professionals or the authorities if you had COVID symptoms. And they argued that would allow people to be cared for earlier, and therefore help with the long-term symptoms and maybe prevent them from going to the hospital. Okay, but again, there's some cost benefits there, and do we really, really want to go down that path? I don't think so. At least not. I wouldn't want to go down that path. Maybe for everyone, maybe it's different. No. So timeline, is it critical helping us prepare September to December? No. This agenda, it's going to take a long time to play out, man. There's a lot of pushback to this. That's the good news. There's a lot of pushback, especially in the United States. I think there's going to be a lot of pushback elsewhere, but people aren't ready to be microchipped. People aren't really ready for the Internet of Bodies. People are not ready to. A lot of people are not ready to just take the vaccine. And again, I'm not saying it's a right or wrong decision. It should be up to you. But they're going to get a lot of pushback here. And I think the 2030 timeline actually is far more realistic. I don't think this is something that happens that quickly, but I think that we could have far fewer freedoms in September, December. I think that one thing that you'll see within the next year is a lot of cities requiring doing the vax mandates. So now we've seen New York do it. We've seen San Francisco do it. We've seen New Orleans do it. I'm sure within the next few weeks there'll be more and more cities. I think that it's highly probable that there's maybe not the majority, but like half the cities, major cities, maybe over 1 million people, or maybe over 2 million people in the United States will have these mandates, which are basically Jim Crow laws. When you look at the relationship between the government and the business, obviously it's not like a Jim Crow law when you look at the relationship between the business and the customer, because they're segregating and they're discriminating against customers of a particular ethnicity or skin color. And then on the other hand, you're discriminating against customers that have not been vaccinated. So obviously that's different. You can't control your skin color. You can control taking a vaccine, but the relationship between the government and the business is identical, meaning that the government is literally saying to the business, you are not allowed, it is illegal for you to serve a specific group in the population. There's a specific group of Americans that you cannot serve. It's illegal for you to serve them. That, no matter how you want to slice it, dice it, chop it up, is the exact same as the Jim Crow laws. So that's the world we're heading into very quickly. So part of your question there, I think, takes a lot of time. What we're seeing there, I think, happens within the next year. I think it's very possible within the next year that you're not allowed to get on a plane. That one, I really, really hope I'm wrong. But there again, I think the free market could be our salvation, or the solution. Salvation is probably too strong of a word, but our solution there, because unless the government just gives them more bailouts and handouts and stimmies to enforce the regulation, I don't think the airlines could handle that type of hit, where they just said, hey, listen, 150 million Americans, we don't want your business anymore. The airlines have such thin margins that I don't see how they could do that. Only time will tell. But I think there's a much higher probability that 35, 45, 50% of large cities within a year will have mandates to where effectively, if you don't want to get the vaccine, you can't go to the city, because you really can't go into a hotel. You can't go into a restaurant. You can't probably go into a grocery store. You go there and walk around the sidewalk for a while. But in reality, you're kind of banned from half the United States. Okay, my neighbor asked me, don't you feel like free market may cause minorities to be left out at... Wait a minute here. My neighbors ask me, don't you feel like free market may cause minorities to be left out, as in the recent past minorities were not able to visit a dentist because white people didn't want to... What? I don't know what you're talking about. Because white people didn't want to share. Huh? Okay. No, there's if you look at discrimination, the history of discrimination in the United States, most often what you'll find is the only institutions that can really discriminate and practiced discrimination were nonprofit, or they were subsidized by the government, because businesses that are small, mid-sized businesses, they can't afford to do that stuff, because their competitor will just pop up and say, hey, I'll take your business. And then what are you going to do? All your customers are going to go over to the business that's willing to accept everyone, and then you're out of business. There's too much competition for customers. And now what you'll find is that there was massive amounts of discrimination in the government, and ironically enough, they don't like to admit this, but in the universities. Why? Because there's no profit and loss. They're subsidized by the government, so they could afford to discriminate because they didn't have to cater to customers, right? They didn't have a profit and loss. So that's really where you'll find the most discrimination in American history, especially toward the latter stages there, right? And again, we've got to remember that the Jim Crow laws, a lot of people on the left like to think that those were just the businesses. No, that was the businesses wanted to serve the blacks, and they wanted to serve everybody. They wanted the money. Who cares, right? It's the government that imposed those laws and forced the businesses to eliminate, to discriminate against a certain group in the population. So, and again, you have to look through this through the lens of greed, right? Because the same people that sit there and tell you that the free market produces discrimination are the same people that are going to tell you that employers are just insatiably greedy, that entrepreneurs, capitalists, well, they're just insatiably greedy. Well, if they have this insatiable lust for money that is totally out of control, then by definition, that will prevent them from discriminating because they want the money. You see, what you have to realize, and Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman pointed this out very, very well, is that there's a cost to discrimination. So the only entities that can afford and stomach that cost are entities that, like I said earlier, don't have a P&L. And since there's a large cost to discriminate that you have to pay, if you are truly greedy and only worried about the bottom line, you are not willing to absorb that cost because you want the money. So now the free market is the solution to discrimination. What we've seen throughout history is what creates the most amount of discrimination is the government. And we're seeing that right now with the mandates. Same thing. And yet people can't even see it. It's unbelievable. Will there be a blow off top in stocks? I don't know. One thing that I've really been trying to think through carefully is what the catalyst to the next crash could be. And when I'm talking about a crash, I'm talking about something that the Fed or maybe even the government couldn't paper over. Like I know the last crash, most of you know this as well, in March of 2020, you know, the Fed came in and said, oh, we'll do this and, you know, take interest rates down to zero and we'll do QE infinity and commit to $1 trillion a day in repo. And the market still went down. So the Fed put basically expired. I think that's my opinion. But then the government came in with the CARES Act, and that's when the stock market really started to go straight up. That was kind of the defining moment. That was the catalyst, if you will, if you look at a timeline. But I've been trying to think, you know, is there an event, a black swan event, let's say, that would crash the stock market, like every market, in nominal terms, not just in real terms, because we've talked about that many times. And I know, Seymour, you're a regular listener. So I'm sure you've heard me talk about the stock market crashing up. Venezuela would be a good example of that. And I've done quite a few videos on that. But I'm talking about the stock market just flat out crashing in nominal terms, going down by 60, 70%. You know, and the stock market can go down a lot faster than the housing market. What could create that black swan? And then what could create an environment where we go into a Japan where we do not have a recovery, where stocks do not reinflate? I think that's a better way to say it. Recovery is not a good way because we're so overinflated. We're at a level that is just completely unjustifiable when you look at PE ratios, cash flows, etc. So what could create an environment where they not only crash, but then they don't go back up, they don't reinflate? This bubble doesn't, the air's out of it, and the air is not coming back in the balloon. Again, like we saw in Japan. And honestly, what I keep going back to is if the, and I'm saying if, and I'm not implying that there are long-term side effects to the vaccines. Let's say, I need to think of a different word for that because YouTube's going to ban me for sure. But I'm not saying that there are. I'm saying we don't know, and there is no way of knowing. I know a lot of people on Twitter sit there and say, "Oh, well, you know, like Johnson and Johnson. Well, that technology's been around for a long time. Yada yada yada." Yeah. But listen, I have listened to so many doctors over the last week. It would make your head spin. I've been obsessed with this, and the argument for there being no side effects long term is that the vaccines that we have had in the past, there have never been any significant long-term side effects. Therefore, the probability is very low that with these vaccines that we, again, don't have any long-term. And we know there's not significant short-term if what they're telling us is true, which I'm skeptical, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But let's just assume for a moment the data that we're getting from the mainstream media is accurate regarding the side effects short term. So, okay, we have that, but then what they'll do is they'll say, okay, so the probability is very low that long term we have side effects because we've never had side effects to this type of vaccine in the past. But then what they'll say is they'll say that this is a miracle of science because we've never had a vaccine that has been approved in less than 8 years. And this one was approved in 2 to 3 months. So on one hand, they'll say it's a miracle of science that we've never had a vaccine approved in under 8 years, and then they'll say that we've never had a vaccine with that had long-term side effects or significant long-term side effects. But then they'll sit there and say, well, because we've never had one, therefore the one that got approved in 2 months will not have any long-term side. It's total apples and oranges. And I've tried to listen to the best arguments I can on both sides to be as objective as possible. And that's usually their argument as to why we won't see any long-term. And that's not a very good argument to me. Again, you're comparing. You're comparing vaccines that were approved over 8 years to a vaccine that was approved in 2 to 3 months. And it seems like you're being intellectually dishonest right there. And that's another reason why I scratch my head, and it makes me hesitate to trust what you're really, what you're hearing in the mainstream media. So my point there is, I think the black swan event could be if, and again, this is a huge if, but if it comes out that the vaccines are not as safe, that they do have long-term side effects that people were not aware of, and that was not disclosed for whatever reason, I think that's your black swan event. Because you've got to really think about the state of our society, and that you've got half of Americans who have absolutely no faith and confidence in the institutions. All of us, I think, can relate to that. And then you have the other half that has a lot of faith, or at least enough faith to assume that everything that's being told to them by the mainstream media is accurate, and everything that's being told to them by the CDC is accurate. But what happens if those people, if it turns out that the mainstream media is wrong? and to a degree to which they can't cover it up. You see that now you got big problems, and this is one of the dangers, I think, in the mainstream media, putting all their eggs in this basket. They are putting every single, I mean, they are doubling down, they are tripling down, they are quadrupling down on this narrative. And the institutions are, the media is, the hospitals are. I mean, if it turns out that it's not true to the extent to which we've been told, I think you see a complete collapse in society, because there's no more faith in on any political side of anybody. I don't care what their political leanings are. It doesn't matter. Nobody is going to trust the government or our institutions at all. Zero. But we're still going to have the cerveza sickness, because it's not like you can, people think that, oh, you get the vaxes or whatever, that eliminate. No, it doesn't. That doesn't eliminate it. Nah, you still got it. It's just, it's still there. So if it turns out that, people don't have some sort of silver bullet or panacea that they can point to, and, what would people do? Think about that. What would people do? They would freak out. They would lock themselves in their house, because see, what's happened is the media has created 150 million hypochondriacs. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that you want to get COVID and it's no big deal, or it's the flu or anything. It's not the flu. Now, it may have the same case fatality rate, but it does different things. You don't want it, right? But there's 150 million Americans that don't want it to the degree of hysteria, that think that it is on an equal plane to brain cancer. And the mainstream media is at fault for doing that. So they've created that monster. You think that if it comes out that the vaccines have long-term side effects that people didn't know about, you think that the mainstream media is going to say, oh, but yeah, but don't worry about it, because that cerveza sickness thing, it's not as bad as we thought, so just go outside. No. The damage has been done. You've scared these people out of their mind, and it's going to have long-term effects on the way they view the world and how paranoid they are of everything. Not to mention the long-term side effects that it'll have on kids, for heaven's sakes. I mean, I read a study on that, a psychological study on kids seeing adults, and I'm kids where they're mentally developing, like 1, 2, 3 years old, to see adults expressionless for let's say half their lives. If you're 3 years old, for half your life, you've seen adults other than your parents at home as expressionless, like people without a face. And we as adults just kind of shrug that off like, oh, no big deal. No, that's a big deal. That is a very, very big deal in the psychological development of children. And so they're doing that as well. So you see what I'm saying is, if there's all trust lost, what do those 150 million hypochondriacs do? They lock themselves in their house. They won't go outside. My goodness, can you even imagine the paranoia? And so then what's the government going to do? They're going to print money. And I think I'm using that term after I said I shouldn't use that term, but you guys get it, right? They're going to create more dollars. They're going to send out stimmy, deficit spend. Fed's going to monetize. They're going to do everything they can to prop up the economy. They're going to, try to encourage people to go outside and do this and this and this. They're going to change their tune. But that's just going to create even more resentment and more distrust because of them doubling, tripling, quadrupling down right now on this whole narrative. You see? But then the problem there is people aren't going to go back to work. And then we got a huge problem with goods and services. And then you've just got nothing but money printing. And you've got no production. But then you also have a point where I think the market even realizes that, holy shit, now we got a problem where we've still got the cerveza sickness. We don't really have any vaccines that people are willing to take, but yet now we've got 150 million hypochondriacs that won't leave their house and are going to live the rest of their life like Howard Hughes. That's a big problem. And yeah, we have all this money printing, but so what? And I really need to kind of think that through. So I'm trying to figure out how I can turn that into a whiteboard to understand the economic ramifications of what that would mean. But I think that's the black swan event. That's the black swan event that I'm most worried about right now. And again, I want to be very, very, very clear. I am not saying that the the vaccines have long-term consequences. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying no one knows. And therefore, if we do see some that comes out, and to an extent to which the media can't cover it up, that's your black swan event right there. That's the catalyst. That's what brings the whole house of cards down. That's what collapses the economy, and that's what does it in a way that where the Fed and the government is completely impotent. They nothing they will do will be able to keep asset prices from crashing, in my opinion. And obviously, I hope, like I said earlier, I hope I'm wrong. Do you think the repo system is creating an illusion of liquidity? I don't think it creates an illusion of liquidity. I think it does create liquidity. But I think what creates more, I think what let me kind of rephrase your question a little bit. I think that the collateral multiplier gives the illusion of liquidity. And that if the collateral multiplier decreases significantly, that's going to create financial markets freezing up. There's no doubt that if repo stop, oh my gosh, I didn't read the rest of your question. Yeah, listen, if repo stops, the whole global economy is done. That's like asking me, would my motor stop if I took out all the oil? Yeah. Yep. Your motor's not going to run. It's going to blow up. It's going to freeze up, to use your terminology. That's basically what the repo market is for the global economy. It's the oil that makes the motor run. It's the lubricant. It's the plumbing. It's what makes it go round. It's the liquidity provider for pretty much the entire globe. So yeah, if repo goes down, it's game over. So again, I think the repo market gives liquidity, but kind of a subcategory there would be the collateral multiplier. And because, Jeff Snyder believes that collateral multiplier is like 20, 30 times. So for every one T-bill that exists, it's actually being used, let's say 30 times through rehypothecation. That gives the illusion of liquidity, because really there's not 30 T-bills, there's one. And if the collateral multiplier went down to 1, then depending on what the collateral multiplier is now, I don't know if that would make the entire market stop, but that would be, we'd have big problems right there. We'd have very, very big problems. So I think it's a great question, but I would just suggest that instead of focusing on the entire repo market, try to hone down and focus on the collateral multiplier. And of course, the collateral multiplier has a lot to do with counterparty risk, or perceived counterparty risk. Will the SDR back central bank digital currencies. I mean, I've read papers by the IMF where they envision this world where the digital SDR is the reserve asset for most of the central banks, and that's kind of like, take the place of gold as an example. That's what they're trading back and forth, and then their central bank. Then each of them has their own central bank digital currency. So I don't. I don't know if I'd say it'll back the central bank digital currency, because I don't think that would. I don't think the digital SDR would be base money. Maybe it would. Because see, right now central banks have SDRs that go back and forth, but it's a very small portion of their balance sheet. So I don't know. I mean, I think what backs the central bank digital currencies is, I don't think anything really has to back the central, because I think the Fed could be insolvent. I don't really think it would matter too much. I think they could have negative equity, but I think that they'll have some sort of, if you're talking about because when they create a central bank digital currency, those are denominated in dollars, let's say, and if they send out $1,000 worth of stimmy checks, so that's a liability on their balance sheet. What's the corresponding asset? So I think it might just be a loan. I don't know. It could be. That's an interesting concept. The one thing I would point out there is that currently with the Federal Reserve Act, they would not be allowed to do that. I don't think that really matters too much. If we've seen the way they've operated in the past, obviously the Federal Reserve Act didn't mean anything in 2020. So I think that they would get around that pretty easy. But just quick FYI, technically, the Federal Reserve Act would prevent them from doing that. Does having a digital private currency as the world reserve currency provide more liquidity to markets if properly backed by real assets? What provides liquidity is people's confidence that they're going to get paid back. That's what provides liquidity. It's confidence in the system. It's very bizarre. If you really start thinking about what the financial system is, or what the dollar is, for that matter, it's all just a game of confidence. That's all it is. So if there were confidence in the market and in the individual players and the lenders and the borrowers, and if there's confidence in the system, I think that, yeah, you'd see liquidity, because people would be willing to lend. They would be willing to, there would be a market, a demand for assets, and there would be a demand for securitization, really. How do you make farmland liquid? Securitization in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's just, it's like Jim Grant says, Wall Street takes a good idea and turns it into a bad idea. And securitization might fall into that category. But I think it's all about confidence. If you don't have confidence, if the market participants do not have confidence, I don't care what the system is. If it's a digital private currency, there's not going to be liquidity. If they do have confidence, there's going to be more and more liquidity. And I see that's exactly what's happening right now with the Fed. And look at what happened prior to 2008. We had very few bank reserves in the system, but we had plenty of liquidity. It was not really an issue. But then all of a sudden the system broke in 2008 with the GFC, and it's never been repaired. So now we have to have 4 trillion in bank reserves. And we have to have all of this government intervention. We have to have the psychological magic of quantitative easing. you got to have all these things propping up the system, right? Why is that? Why is that? It's because the system is broken. And if the system is broken, there's a lack of confidence. Why do we have to have pristine? Snyder talks about pristine collateral all the time, and we hear him talk about that. And he's obviously he's right to talk about it. But why do we have a shortage of pristine collateral? Why? Because prior to the GFC, everything was pristine collateral. Mortgage-backed securities were pristine collateral. Asset-backed securities were pristine collateral. Like the joke that I make on a lot of my whiteboard videos, they securitized oceanfront property in Arizona. Not literally, but that was the joke that I made. That was pristine collateral. Anything was, was pristine collateral. So why? Because there was a lot more confidence in the system because it wasn't broken. You see? So I think that's kind of the way I would answer your question, is to say that if the system you're referring to instills confidence, then yes, I think that liquidity will be provided. But if there's no confidence in the system, then you're gonna have a problem with liquidity. Let's see here. What techniques are you using to hedge against the 1 trillion repo LIBOR Lynette Zhang freezing up like that did? Or another moral hazard bailout? Let's see here. What techniques? Oh, what techniques am I using to hedge against? Oh shoot, I got to get going. Let me answer this question really quick here. I see Sebastian's coming on here. I got to get over to the member live stream, but let me try to answer this real quick. What techniques am I using to hedge against this 1 trillion freezing up like it did and another moral hazard bailout? I mean, it just goes back to my 10-80-10 portfolio, Mike. That's really, I would suggest you got to own some gold, for heaven's sakes. I like 10%. It's not that's not investment advice. I'm just telling you what I do. And I like to just get paid for 80% of my portfolio. I like to have a lot of that outside the United States, some of it inside the United States. I like to have diversification within my political risk and the currency risk. And, I like to be paid for stuff. So even if the nominal value of the asset I'm holding goes up or down, it really doesn't matter because I'm still getting that rent check. And I know a lot of people say, well, how do you know you're going to get the rent check? Yeah, you don't know. But if you've got the right properties, there's a very good chance of it, especially if you have properties outside the United States that aren't correlated to the U.S. market. And then just 10% in speculative assets that I think there's asymmetric good risk reward. And Bitcoin could fall into that category. I haven't paid any attention to Bitcoin in the last 2 or 3 weeks because I've been so focused on this, on our freedom and liberty and the mandate things. So I don't even know what the prices are. I haven't paid any attention to market sentiment, but it could also be things like uranium, the gold miners, I think are a good way to play that. I think that's all you can do. And then have a cash position that you're comfortable with. That's really the only way to hedge is diversification, political diversification, and just kind of stupefying your portfolio by getting paid to own the majority of the assets that are in your portfolio. Okay, I got to get over to the member live stream, guys. Definitely check out rebelcapitalistlive.com. You can see the speakers there. You can join us in Houston in January 7th through the 9th. Just join myself and other like-minded rebel capitalists. At no point in time, I think, at least in no point in my life, has it been more important to surround yourself with people who who are not just like-minded, because I don't want to seem as though I'm creating an echo chamber, but people that have similar values and that you can kind of bounce ideas off of and really get some positive vibes from and gain support. And it's always not always, but I think it can feel like you're just on this island where you're the only person who has the same belief system. You're the only person that that is worried about freedom and liberty, and you're the only person that that sees the cracks in the system. And sometimes it's just great to get around others that see the world the same way you do, and it'll give you a great boost of energy and some positive vibes going into 2022, and really give you some good ideas to how you can increase your wealth and thrive in a world of out of control banks, or out of control central banks and big government. So I'd strongly suggest going there, checking out rebelcapitalistlive.com. Guys, I can't do the shout outs because I got to get over to the member live stream. You guys enjoy your evening.